Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. I am seriously so excited to share this interview with Jessica Custer with you. Jessica is a friend, former colleague, longtime collaborator, Girls Club Collective member, and Magic Mind alum who is doing such cool work at the intersection of project management and impact. Today, we discussed things like how the inequitable distribution of opportunity and a second grade invitation to set a long-term goal has motivated and inspired Jessica along her journey. The experience in the Peruvian Amazon that led Jessica to appreciate the shortcomings of designing for a community and not in partnership with them. Jessica's experiences implementing change at scale in partnership with business at organizations like Fair Trade and BSR. Why project management hasn't historically been valued as a skill set within ESG, sustainability, and social impact teams, and what we can do to change that. What agile project management can learn from impact practitioners and vice versa. How theory of change can be applied to our personal and professional lives. A more expansive understanding of power. And how a more nuanced appreciation of our strengths can shift how we think about leadership. With over a decade of experience at the intersection of business and social impact, Jessica is a Swiss Army knife for leaders and doers working to build a more just and regenerative world. She's the creator of The Changemaker's Guide to Getting Good Shit Done, a Substack dedicated to exploring the sticky ideas surrounding change making in a business environment, testing new ideas, and promoting best practices for project management and execution, specifically informed by and designed to drive positive societal impact. She leads the Possible to Probable workshop, a group experience for changemakers that want guided support to operationalize their visions for a brighter tomorrow. And she provides custom support to the best clients, enabling their brilliance to shine while helping make sure the how gets done in ways that support their what and why. She's also a dog mom, enjoys blacksmithing and narrative nonfiction writing, and is currently busy exploring her new city, Melbourne, Australia. I just know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jessica as much as I did, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Hello. Oh my goodness. I could not be more excited for today's conversation on the Women Changing the World podcast. I am joined today by Jessica Custer, who is a friend, collaborator, colleague, GCC member, and just all around one of my favorite humans on the planet. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Liz. I've told you I love your podcast, and I'm absolutely thrilled and just so deeply honored to be included among this group of amazing and world-changing women that I listen to all the time and learn so much from on your podcast. So thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. It is seriously such an honor and a pleasure and a joy. And would love to get started. For people who don't already know you, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. I'm Jessica Custer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. This is country of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I'm a partner. I'm a dog mom. auntie, daughter, sister, friend, and now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm building a business that supports the leaders and doers working towards a more just and regenerative world actually get that done.
I feel like there's so many things in there that I want to underline and pull on in our conversation today. Maybe to get us started, would love to hear a little bit more about all the things that you're up to these days, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, so personally, I've just had a pretty massive change in my life. My partner and our dog Oliver and I recently moved after living for 10 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. We moved to my partner's hometown of Melbourne, Australia. So we're spending a lot of time getting settled and exploring our new home and thinking about how we want to put down roots here and how we're connecting, spending lots of time connecting with family and existing community and thinking about how we want to build new community here. Maybe one fun anecdote that I'll throw in is I think moving here, I think I've become a bird enthusiast.
I love it. We've had many bird enthusiasts on this podcast.
I don't know if it's an age thing, like I've ticked up to that age where I start noticing birds, or I'm just so amazed and surrounded, even in the suburbs of Melbourne, by all of these beautiful, colorful, different kinds of birds that feel really exotic and magical of flying around my balcony and in the parks. And it's completely different from my previous experience. So I'm loving that. My dog used to occupy all of the photo and video space on my phone. And now I think it's about equal, like my dog and birds that I see. So that's been really fun.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much, and would love to hear about work-wise too, what you've been up to.
Looking back, I'm just thinking, I've spent 15 years working at the intersection of business and social impact, and that's been mostly from the nonprofit sector, working with business as the lever for change. So when my partner and I decided that we were going to move to Australia, we knew that this was going to disrupt our careers, and we started thinking about how are we going to transition and how are we thinking about that. So I naturally moved to freelance consulting, and I loved it. I loved the freedom and the flexibility that it gave me in my life. But it also was this really nice push for me to consider what specific problem I wanted to be solving and how I wanted to frame that, ideally contributing to really useful thought leadership. So as I gave this consideration, I started to see a real skill set and leadership gap on project management, which maybe doesn't sound very sexy to a lot of people, but project management is the execution of creating a change within an organization or a system or a society. And it's so important to getting anything done. And despite that, what I was seeing and hearing from the people I was talking to is that it's really challenging skill set to find, hire, and keep in the field of, let's say, big umbrella, sustainability, social impact, ESG, et cetera. So at the same time, it happens to be a real strength of mine and something I absolutely love taking charge of throughout my career. And I just got really excited about the prospect of helping all of these brilliant leaders and doers in my field to upskill or just to get the support they need to help the change that they're driving move from something that's possible to something that's probable and actually going to happen and change. So I do this in a couple of ways. I'm the creator of the Changemaker's Guide to Getting Good Shit Done. This is a Substack dedicated to exploring the sticky questions surrounding change making in a business environment. Also a place for testing new ideas and promoting best practices for project management and execution. And really importantly, done in a way that's specifically informed by and designed to drive positive societal impact. I also lead the Possible to Probable workshop. This is a group experience for change makers that want guided support to operationalize their visions for brighter tomorrows. This includes facilitated units focused on visioning, planning, and transitioning into execution. And it's really useful for folks who are at the outset of what they're doing. So, for example, a mission-driven founder that wants to solidify their theory of change and plan and then take next steps towards actually getting it done. A business leader who's just completed their materiality assessment. So maybe they've identified a social issue they need to do more than manage. They need to have a strategic plan and action around. Or a doer in any organization who's tasked with charting out a project or a program over the next year and wants to put themselves on firm ground from a process and project management perspective. I think in a lot of ways, this work can be kind of lonely. So having thought partnership and group support around, maybe you're working on different things, but this is a space to work on that with other professionals that are doing so as well. And finally, I provide custom support, and I'm so grateful to work with the best clients. I really see my role as enabling their brilliance. So many thoughtful, talented leaders in this space that bring so much to this work, and I want to help them shine and make sure that the how gets done in ways that support their what and their why.
It's so fun to hear you describe your portfolio and what's on your plate right now, because having known you for a while, one, it feels so aligned, and two, having been in this space for a long time, it's so needed, and it's so exciting to see you bringing together this demand and need in the space, your very clear and very real strengths in the how and operationalizing things and getting stuff done. I know that I have an inside view on all the twists and turns that brought you here to this moment. And it's such a cool story, and would really love to invite you to take up space and tell us your story, where we find you right now.
Thank you for this invitation. One of my favorite parts of the podcast is listening to other women talk about their journeys. And it really makes me reflect on, what is so core to me and the way that I show up that people never really get to see. I am going to take the invitation to take up space, and I just really appreciate hearing others and the opportunity to do so. So thank you. Before I get started, I grew up in conditions of working class poor in rural Ohio. My parents were high school educated. My father was enlisted in the Marine Corps directly after high school. And my mother was in kind of casual work, serving waitress, and eventually was able to become a customer service person at a labeling company. When my father got out of the Marine Corps in the late 80s, he really struggled to find work at that time. And I think the challenge of having been very proud of his military career, having been a part of an elite recon team in the Marine Corps, and then coming back home and not being able to find any sort of work that felt like it valued his experience was really challenging. He eventually found work as a vending machine repair person. So both of my parents were part of this working poor class, and they worked incredibly hard. They were both such hard workers, but it just kind of always felt like we could never get ahead. And both of my parents, but especially my father, had this idea that the only way to get out of our situation, the only way to break the cycle, was higher education. And he hadn't been able to do it for himself. And he was fairly certain that he wasn't going to be able to help us do it. But it was the only way out. And we had to figure out how to do that for ourselves. This kind of mentality is being driven into us. And so I remember in second grade, we had a unit on goals, and we had to stand up in front of the class and share one short-term goal and one long-term goal. And I don't remember my short-term goal. It was probably like get all A's on my report card. But my long-term goal as a 7-year-old person in second grade was get a scholarship and go to college. And so that really kind of shaped and impacted the way I thought about school and the importance of an education. And ultimately, I was able to earn a full academic scholarship to the University of Akron in Ohio. And that completely changed my life. It also kind of rocked me. I was absolutely stunned when that happened. I didn't think it was real. I had such severe imposter syndrome. I thought, there's no way, they made a mistake. They're going to find me out. I have to do my best, show them that I deserve this. But when I went to university, the scholarship changed my life in a few ways. It allowed me to study whatever I wanted and how much I wanted. So coming from the place that I came from, my primary motivation was to escape a cycle of poverty. And so the thing, interestingly, that came into my understanding of what could help do that was business. I think maybe a combination of where I came from and maybe Hollywood. You see people in business, they've got the money. So I decided to study accounting and international business. And I did that with that primary motivation. But at the same time, the scholarship was all inclusive and it allowed me to take as many credit hours as I wanted. So whereas a full load was 18 credit hours, I was normally taking 22 or 24. And I could take philosophy classes and culture classes and language classes and economics classes and really get my money's worth. I was like a dog with a bone. I ended up leaving with 3 degrees because of how many classes I took. So that was one beautiful outcome of that opportunity. And the other was it allowed me to travel. My grandfather was a merchant marine and my dad did tours around Asia when he was in the Marine Corps. And they both talked a lot with great fondness about traveling different parts of the world. And it was a huge goal of mine to leave the place I had come from, to explore the world outside of that community, outside of the state, outside of the country, and see what the world had to offer. I was able to, through this scholarship, apply some of the credit hours to study abroad. I was able to use the money that I made from my factory job and my fast food service job. Instead of applying that to tuition, I was able to use that to travel. By the time I graduated, I had worked in Spain, studied in Mexico, Peru, Argentina, and South Korea, and been able to also explore other places around those opportunities and beyond. And as I was doing that, I started to see examples of poverty in other parts of the world. And I started to connect with these other communities that were having these experiences that were very different from mine. But I connected viscerally with the feeling that I was perceiving as just can't seem to get ahead. Not sure why, but there's some threads in this invisible system that mean if you're born here and you're in this specific situation, you don't have access, you don't have opportunity, and you might never, compared to somebody who lives 100 meters away from you. I returned from that trip, honestly, kind of in a bit of a depression. Because I'd spent 3 or so years of my scholarship studying accounting and business, and I was going to find my way out of that situation. It really didn't do anything to connect to the larger problem. There was all of these other communities and peoples that were bound by this same invisible system without any real reason. And I'm reminded of the Layla Jinnah, who's a founder of SamaSource and a pioneer in impact sourcing, who famously said, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And this got to the core of a feeling that was very viscerally important to me. And that I realized as a student of accounting and international business, I was doing nothing to solve. And so I became just kind of morose around my studies and what I was doing, because I also didn't see a way to change those studies. I didn't have the money to go back and start over. I was a scholarship kid who was so blessed and fortunate to be in that position already. And around this time, my mom, who I should pause here and say is one of the most important role models in my life, is someone who worked her customer service job for 15 years and then just absolutely crashed through glass ceilings as a woman and as a person without a university degree to become a salesperson in her field, and completely changed her situation in our lives as well. And it's just someone who showed what's possible way back when I didn't have a lot of role models for that kind of thing. So she used to watch Oprah every single day. And she had seen on Oprah a person named Muhammad Yunus, who had written a book called Banker to the Poor about microfinance, and was receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for his work, and was expanding on that work to put forward a new vision for social enterprise, or how business could be used in a model that was financially sustainable, but also held up and elevated other outcomes, positive societal outcomes, as its primary purpose. And I was enthralled. I mean, this completely changed my outlook on what was possible. I no longer was feeling, oh my gosh, I don't like what I'm doing. I was now feeling I'm learning all of these skill sets that can be applied to this global problem of access to opportunity in a way that I can be a useful part of the solution. I absolutely just dove into those concepts. And then as an honors student, I had to produce an honors project for my graduation. And I remember professors, suggesting looking into hedge funds and other aspects of accounting that I just found completely uninteresting. And instead, I went and I developed a social business model focused on providing sustainable sanitation to a community that I had seen and experienced in the Peruvian Amazon. During one of my travels, I had gone out to a city in the Peruvian Amazon, and we were doing a river boat tour. And as we were touring, we were passing, as we were leaving the marina area, we were passing this community that was floating on the river. And it was a peri-urban community on a floodplain that it was right next to the city itself, but it was completely disconnected from any city services. And the homes were built on balsa wood. So as the river rose, they floated up with the river. And as the river came down, they floated down with the river. And in between the rainy and the dry seasons, there was a mucky, muddy period. And as the houses floated, there were also other little bathroom units that also floated. And all of the waste that was being produced went straight into the water. And at the same time, folks were at the other side of their homes washing their clothes in that same water. And I saw a young girl brushing her teeth on the edge of her home and then sticking her toothbrush in the water and then back in her mouth. And this was just an experience for me where I thought circumstance is creating this lack of access to one of the most basic human needs, access to dignified sanitation. And so I used my honors project as an opportunity to explore what would it look like to think of business, not just as a profit model, but as a mechanism for being financially sustainable, but flipping the script on sanitation and thinking about how we think of people not as customers that can't afford our service, but as suppliers of raw materials that sell what they have to sell. And we create fertilizer and methane to produce electricity out of it. So I created this social business model, and it gave me a chance to explore what this could look like. And ultimately, I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to go and spend a year in Peru exploring the feasibility of this model. First, I graduated, and then I went to my first job, which was at Deloitte Tax LLP. I had made it. I had got a job with one of the big four accounting and consulting firms, and that was it. And so after 6 months, when I was letting people know I was leaving to move to the Peruvian Amazon and spend my time thinking about collecting human waste and recycling it, some people who knew me thought I was amazing and fascinating and so brave and courageous. And a lot of people thought I was insane because I was leaving this definition of success that I guess at that point I still subscribed to, but I was reaching for something else. I did that. I moved to the Amazon and I had the most incredible learning experience. I learned that developing something, designing something for other people from thousands of miles away really isn't the way that good change happens. I learned that there were so many assumptions I made that were incorrect. This didn't become a brilliant social enterprise that created a completely new model of sanitation in Peru. So it wasn't the success story I hoped it would be. But it did help me know that I was on the right path, that this was exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to be doing, that I wanted to be focusing on. And I had the business skills to suss that part out. But what I didn't have were the social change skills, the understanding social issues and impact and sustainability, and the ways, that element of combining those things with business. And so I decided to study a master's degree. I moved to France. I studied at HEC Paris, which was a business school that offered a master's course in sustainability and social innovation. And so this was really important to me because at the time, most business schools were only offering like 3 credit hours in an ethics course or 3 credit hours in a green MBA that would give you some information on sustainability. But this course was rooted in a business school, but it was an entire master's course entirely focused on sustainability and social innovation and what business transformation could look like with that in mind. That master's program gave me a ton of the skill sets that I felt I was really lacking. And then I was trying to figure out where to go from there. there really weren't a lot of opportunities. And so I did get this opportunity that came up from an organization called Pixera Global, which focuses on international development. They had a program called MBAs Without Borders. The concept was basically taking individuals with business skill sets and pairing them with social entrepreneurs. And so I was paired with a mom and daughter team of social entrepreneurs in Kerala and South India who were focused on revitalizing their hand weaving culture, which was a dying culture in their home state of Kerala, while also revitalizing the livelihoods that came along with it and helping those hand weavers to gain access to international markets. So this was kind of flipping the script from social enterprises that create better access to products and dignified services to the way business can be used to create better access to opportunity and livelihoods and connection to markets. So that was an amazing experience. And from there, I moved to Fair Trade Certified in Oakland, California. There I had the opportunity to work on that access to opportunity and livelihoods, but on a much bigger scale in the agriculture industry. I worked with consumer packaged good companies and their supply chains all the way back to producers on the farm to help create a more ethical and transparent partnership and what can be really opaque supply chains, and to enable the farmers and the workers at the beginning of those supply chains to self-organize and invest and lobby on their own behalf in partnership and with support from companies that are often kind of very far away from them. When I started this work, I felt really inspired by a quote by Dr. Lilla Watson, a quote that they gave in a 2004 speech calling for constitutionally enshrined voice for First Peoples. And the quote is, "If you've come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I kept this close to my heart in that work because I felt that some of the ways in which we have carried out international development work about, again, that concept of let me design for you, let me come and tell you what you need, let me help you. And the connection for me with this work was really about, this is bound up with my own interest in liberation for all of the folks who don't have equitable access to opportunity, but absolutely deserve it. And we should create more opportunities to access it. So I loved this work in supply chains for two reasons. One, because we were working directly with communities and finding ways to support the communities of farmers that weren't necessarily already connected or organized to connect and get organized with resources injected into those communities. And the shifts that I saw over time, in many cases, were really incredible in the sense that relatively small decisions on the part of companies created the opportunity for thousands of farmers that were previously working independently and perhaps not getting a fair deal in their supply chain, created the opportunity for those farmers to organize and not only receive resources injected from those partnerships, but then begin to lobby on their own behalf with their local governments for farm to market roads, for example. So a complete change in the way that communities viewed their power. At the same time, I started to really see that if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I started thinking that I wanted a broader toolkit. I wanted to be able to work with companies in a way that we could assess what were the most important levers, the most impactful levers to pull to create change. And so I moved to Business for Social Responsibility, which is an organization that's focused on partnering with the private sector, mostly Fortune 500 companies, to implement strategies for a more just and sustainable world. And this was a hugely helpful experience for me, gave me a ton of experience in consulting with these organizations in a range of industries, a ton of information on what worked, what didn't, the type of experience that our counterparts inside of companies are having happening when they're trying to create change across an array of issue areas, climate change, human rights, inclusive economies, etc. So this was a truly invaluable experience. And as I kind of came to the moment in time where my partner and I decided to move to Australia, I took this wealth of background and ideas. And as I moved into freelancing, I was exploring how to take this into my own business. So I'll pause there and just thank you again, Liz, for the spaciousness to talk through this journey.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I mean, there's so much in there that I would love to talk more about. I mean, you've had such a fascinating journey to this moment. And I also want to make sure that we dedicate some time to talking about what's now and what's ahead as well. I know so much of your experience really informed and inspired your decision to start your business. And I know that what you've wanted to offer through your business has also evolved over time. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the things that you've noticed and some of the inspiration behind what you're doing, as well as how that's changed since you first went out on your own.
Yeah, thank you for that question. If I look back 10 years ago when I was working with social enterprises, or even at the beginning of my work with Fair Trade Certified, 80% of the work was just trying to get people to pay attention. There were no or very limited roles inside of companies that were focused on sustainability or responsible sourcing or social impact. In those days at Fair Trade, I remember we were trying to get the attention of procurement professionals whose primary role and incentive was to pay fractions of a penny less for whatever they were procuring. So much time and energy was spent on just trying to get people to pay attention, and then actually do some really hard work internally to try to convince organizations about what felt like fairly small changes, but were really impactful inside of those organizations and outside. Fast forward 10 years, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, but over the course of that time, what we've seen is a massive increase in the roles that are dedicated to transformation inside of business that's related to greater societal or environmental issues or pressures. And now you'll have roles and whole teams focused on responsible sourcing or integrating human rights-based approach into business, sustainability focused on the environmental impacts that a company has, ESG focusing on gathering the information and reporting this in a standardized way to investors for their decision making. I absolutely don't want to say all of the resources are there to solve this problem. I think when you speak with these leaders, one of the biggest things you find out is that they're one person doing the job of 10 people. They're a couple of people on a team, but they don't have a lot of resources from the business. There's a lot of things in terms of leadership, will, resource dedication that still need improving. But the fact of the matter is we're just at such a different place in terms of the roles and the resources that are dedicated to this. And that's a great place to be in. And we're also seeing change that's happening from these incredible leaders that have been doing this work inside of organizations for the past 10 or however many years. We're seeing incremental change being achieved. We're seeing the groundwork laid for longer term change. One of the things that hasn't changed over the course of this period of time that I've been looking at this is this expectation that everything is bootstrapped. I think maybe some of this comes from a lot of the brilliant leaders that are working inside of companies now maybe came from nonprofit or civil society, where we're really used to bootstrapping. We're really used to doing a ton with very few resources and honestly creating unbelievable outcomes for the level of resources that we have. But in a business environment, there's a lot of bootstrapping of this type of work. And what's really interesting to look at in a business environment is you don't see that in the other units. I think the type of bootstrapping that has to happen the most is actually the process and project management, the execution work that you probably didn't necessarily get hired for. Maybe you were hired for your DEI expertise, which is a very specific skill set, right? Or for your GHG emissions expertise, or for whatever it may be. But you're being asked to also do all of your own project management and manage all the details of execution. And this doesn't happen in other business units. If you have an engineering team, you're going to have technical product managers, you're going to have product managers, technical project managers, finance, marketing, other elements of the business, you're going to have support to get things executed because those are specific skill sets to get that done. And it's a different skill set than the subject matter expertise of how to do it in many cases. We're doing ourselves a real disservice by accepting as the status quo that anyone working at the intersection of business and social impact or leading ESG or leading a sustainability team does all of their own project management and process management and execution work, when we know that that leads to burnout for leaders. So they get sick of doing it and they leave. And or you have to prioritize on what you're doing. And so maybe it leads to situations where a lot less is actually getting done. And there's a lot of good reasons for why it's not happening. But still, at the end of the day, if it's not getting done, we're not moving forward. Over the course of my career, I've worked on a lot of different elements of social impact. So everything from ethical supply chain to living wage, worker well-being, DEI in the tech sector, lots of different elements of kind of tackling different social issues and this idea of access to opportunity and beyond. When I moved into freelancing into Australia, I was trying to decide, okay, what do I want to focus on? Which of these huge topic areas do I want to dive into? And I received this language that was hugely important to me that helped me understand kind of where I fit and how I fit. And I realized that I am a generalizing specialist. It's also described as a T-shaped person. So across the top of my T are all of these different social issues that I have a strong ability to generalize across. I can come up to speed quickly. I can think about those and be a good thought partner on those. But then the bar of my T, the vertical bar of my T, is the specialist piece. And that is the project management and execution piece. As a generalizing specialist, I aim to bring that specialization and how to get things done to the folks whose specialization is these different areas of social issues and impact that I can generalize with. In terms of evolution, I've realized that how to think about my strengths and the type of person I am as a generalizing specialist and how that can be a really useful tool to what we need right now in business and social impact versus feeling like I needed to become a deep specialist in any of these other areas. So that's been a bit of a change for me.
Oh, I love that framing. Where did that come from, if you don't mind my asking?
As I was exploring this, I'm delving into working on getting my project management professional certification, and it comes from agile methodology of project management. In agile teams, what you're looking for often are a group of generalizing specialists because they're able to each bring an individual element of strength, but then also generalize and work really well across the problem space.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I love that. It really resonates. I hope you are enjoying this episode. I wanted to jump in here and let you know that we are hosting our next free Girls Club Collective Community Power Hour on Wednesday, November 20th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. If you are craving connection with like-hearted leaders and founders in sustainability, social impact, and/or ESG, please believe me when I say that this is the room that you want to be in. We're co-hosting with the Now Work, and our focus will be on our vision for a new economy. You'll be connected with other fantastic change agents. Don't worry, we'll provide some thought prompts and conversation starters, and you'll have a chance to engage with the members of our broader community. We love growing our constellation of change agents and impact leaders so much, and we cannot wait to connect you to the women changing the world in our world. Sign up on our website at girlsclubcollective.co/community-power-hour or via the link in our show notes. If we haven't already met, I look forward to seeing you or meeting you on Wednesday, November 20th. Now back to the episode. You're someone who is so passionate about the value of effective project management, and I've seen so many times how it can make such a huge difference in so many things. I would love to hear from you how project management can help us maximize our impact, and specifically, how could we better apply existing project management or execution expertise to social impact, and how could we make a bigger impact more effectively in a more streamlined way?
I think what's really exciting is that there's a huge existing body of knowledge on project management. It's not super well developed in the social impact space, but it is out there and it exists. And as I've been exploring it, one of the things that I think would be really beautifully applied more in a social impact space is the agile project management methodology. So if you have worked in nonprofits or civil society, or if you've been working in social impact, you're probably kind of familiar with the beautiful Gantt chart, right? And you chart out what change is going to look like over the course of the next year or the 5 years of this program in order to get your foundation funding or whatever it may be. And then you've probably had the experience where 2 weeks into that project, something changes and you're too overwhelmed to go back to that Gantt chart that took you 3 weeks to develop in itself. And now you're just drowning kind of in the swamps of execution. Agile project management was actually developed by software engineers who kind of looked at the body of project management, looked at their space and thought, okay, we need to manage change. That's a really important thing. But traditional project management that is highly regulated and predicted scenarios doesn't work for us. We exist in spaces of rapid change and we want to be designing for people. So we want them to be close and part of our process. Agile project management methodology has things like small sprints to focus on a certain amount of work for a period of time, has things like rolling wave planning, where you have to go through a series of phases as a part of your project or your program, but you plan the first phase out in detail while you let the other ones still be a little hazy so that they can be informed by what happens in your first phase. I think when we think about social change, it's so hard to predict. So the type of planning and execution we bring to it would benefit from having more agility to be able to shift around to the different forms of things that are happening and the changes that are happening over the course of the project. So I think that's one area where there's this huge existing body of agile project management that can be applied into spaces of social impact that can work really well for us in execution. I think there's a huge opportunity for social impact professionals to look at project management and say, okay, we need to be thoughtful and very professionalized and standardized about how we create change. It is important to have a certain standard to how to do it. But what exists isn't exactly right for us. So how do we think about creating thought leadership and standards of practice with nuance for the type of work that we're doing? And I think there's an opportunity to bring in more concepts of inner development, how ourselves as leaders have inner transformation in order to reach external transformation. Another tool I'll cite is the theory of change. Theory of change is this really useful framework that's very common in the nonprofit and government, in the social sector, but you never see it in business. But it's this incredible framework for mapping out why you think what you're doing will lead to the result that you want to achieve, taking into account across that process the stakeholders that you have in mind and the assumptions that you're making about the ecosystem that you're operating in and why you think those connections are true. I think in a business environment, this helps to enable a scenario where we're uplifting other metrics or other outcomes that we're looking for alongside financial sustainability metrics in ways that can be really hard to do in business. So I think a theory of change can be a really useful tool for folks leading materiality assessments, trying to decide what to work on and how to work on it, for folks developing strategies for material issues or for whatever their goals are in that environment.
Well, I love that you brought up theory of change. Can you tell us a little bit more about how theory of change can be useful for us in our lives and our careers?
Yeah, I use it all the time. I have a theory of change for my business. The Possible to Probable workshop has theory of change as the key framework for the visioning component. I use it in my personal life. And Liz, you and I got to do such a fun experiment in the Girls Club Collective, kind of thinking about what would it look like to use this in our lives. And I use it in combination with a tool that you introduced me to called the Wheel of Life, which is that pie chart that has your career, but also your family and community, your hobbies, other elements of your life, health and radiance, that helps folks think about themselves as a whole person when they're doing career planning. I like to combine these two tools. So I'm thinking of myself as a whole person, and then I'm looking across the theory of change and plotting out as a whole person, what am I seeking to achieve? And what are the types of things I'm doing across these different elements of myself in order to achieve that? And I like to check in on it. Checking in monthly is an interesting thing if you're a person like me and you really like to plan and keep tabs on these things. But even quarterly or biannually or yearly, it's such an amazing tool for thinking about yourself as a whole person and checking in on how you feel in terms of being balanced across the different elements of your life and working towards your ultimate North Star.
Totally. Figuring out how to identify and articulate my own theory of change, in part with your help, has been so clarifying, I think, in terms of understanding like why I do what I do. And I found for so many people in our community and so many of my clients, really thinking about what we want to do, why we want to do it, we're uniquely positioned to bring our brilliance to of all the massive challenges that we face in the world today.
100%. I love that. And I think that a lot of people, myself included, get stopped up on wanting it to be perfectly plotted out and kind of feeling like, oh, I don't have this connection to that exactly right. And so kind of abandon it. But I think what's really beautiful about the theory of change as a tool for things like this is it's a guess. It's a hypothesis. But the point is that you're examining it. So you have plotted out your links between the resources you have and what you can do, or what you are doing and what you think that will lead to. And any information you get is information. So if you get through one of those steps and you see, oh, what I thought was going to happen didn't happen, that's information. And because you've plotted it out and you're thinking about these levers and the ways they connect, you're able to pivot more easily, whether that's professionally in the work you're doing or in your life, or if you've combined and integrated the two. And I think that ability to examine and pivot is so powerful.
Totally. I think hopefully I already know leadership is something that's been a big theme on the podcast this season. I've been having a lot of fun asking our guests what leadership is meaning to you right now. And I would love to know from you, Jessica, what does leadership mean to you in this moment?
I guess I'll start with a cliche. You don't have to be in a leadership position to lead or show leadership. I've been doing a lot of learning about the different types of power. So, of course, you have positional power when you're in a position where people report to you or you have the ability to direct people. And that's kind of how we think about it traditionally. But there's all these other types of power, whether it's expertise or informational power, where the knowledge you have can be used in ways to influence or to get things done. Or I think really importantly, relational power, where this is an area where you're such an inspiration, Liz, in terms of authentic connection. And I think we, our field, but maybe the world generally, would benefit from being less narrow in how we describe power and in the pathways we create to that. In a lot of situations that I've been in, the path to power, quote unquote power, is you start as an independent contributor and then you move up and you become a senior independent contributor, and then you move up and you become a manager, and now you have direct reports, and then you're a senior manager and a director. And the only path to power is positional, and it's where you have directive power over other people. I think there's an opportunity to recognize the different strengths that different people have. For example, expert power, being able to move up in a pathway that helps you develop your expertise and share that with others without necessarily having to manage other people. There's something that I learned from a very young age, and I wish I knew who to credit to, but it's basically the concept that there's one way of thinking about our strengths, which is that they're the things that we're good at. But this isn't the full picture. There's a concept that our strengths are actually what gives us energy, what gives us energetic flow. And in some cases, that can be aligned with what you're good at. If you are really good at accounting and you love looking at a balance sheet and sitting down and diving into a financial report, that's maybe a strength then. If you're amazing at accounting and opening up a balance sheet absolutely drains you of energy, then that's not your strength. Another example of that is if you're an empathetic, thoughtful, caring leader, and when folks come in to have a one-on-one with you, you're absolutely energized by your ability to help them, then people management is maybe a strength. If you're that same empathetic, caring, thoughtful leader, but the thought of a one-to-one just absolutely breaks your soul, like you're so done with it, that's not your strength. And I think that as leaders, we could do a service to those that we're leading by helping them identify and pursue their strengths defined by what gives them energy. And then working really hard to have more pathways for people to show the leadership that is aligned with their strengths versus narrow pathways that really only support positional power and leadership.
I love that so much. I love the broadening of how we think about power. And I also love the reflection on strengths being the combination of what we're good at and what energizes us. It's so permission giving to not continue investing and doing a thing that we're like good at maybe, but that drains our soul. Because the last thing we need is for people in positions of power or otherwise who feel exhausted.
We can either spend our time leaning into our strengths and making amazing things happen, or we can choose to spend that time focusing on our weaknesses. There's multiple ways to think about that. But I think any time that we spend on our weaknesses is taking away from the time that we spend doing what really lights us up and what we're really good at. I feel like in a lot of the positions I have been in or organizations I have been in, doing some of this execution work, the detail, the process management, or the project management work has been the role of someone who is more junior. We should be recognizing that these are different skill sets. And it's less about you should take the notes and you should organize the project plan and you should make the updates because you're junior and I'm senior. And it should be more about who's being lit on fire by making sure that this process is going to get us the best result, and who's lit on fire by diving into the research and bringing the subject matter expertise to the conversation, and who's lit on fire by the relational connections they can make and bringing different stakeholders into the conversation. We should really be leaning into helping folks lean into their strengths and then using that in our work rather than kind of these arbitrary positional ideas of who should do what because of how far you are along in your career or otherwise. There's something really sticky about that for me.
Totally. Well, I'm a maximizer too. That's like my number one strengths finder strength. So I love people, me included, focusing on the things that we're good at. You're speaking directly to my maximizer soul. I could talk to you forever. And I also want to be respectful of your and our listeners' time. For people who are listening to you talk about this, who are like, oh my gosh, yes, my soul is lit on fire by how you're talking about all things project management, impact, theory of change, power, leadership. What are the best ways for people to find you, to follow you, and to keep up with the really cool work that you're doing at the intersection of impact writ large and project management?
I would love to hear from anyone who's interested in furthering the conversation and discussing any of this and offering feedback. Love to hear that and build from it and grow with it. I'd love to invite folks to subscribe to my Substack, The Changemakers Guide for Actually Getting Good Shit Done. I'm really hoping to create both a repository for thought leadership and testing, but also a community for others who want to test and build with me. I welcome everyone to visit my website, jessicacuster.com. That's where you can find out more information about the Possible to Probable workshop and other things that I'm up to. And then, of course, I'd be happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way and place to make a direct connection.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I so appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing your story and your journey with us, and sharing some of the magic that you've been making in your career. It's so fun to cheer you on, and I cannot wait to see how all of this continues to unfold.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's been absolutely an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LISBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.